So I got to admit, I was probably the worst remote employee ever. I've only had one remote employee experience in my life, and it was pretty bad. I got to tell you, I think I would probably show up at the gym around 10 and work out, and then have a sauna, and then go to a coffee shop and hang out a bit, and come back and work a little bit, take a walk, come back home and work. I didn't get a lot done, I am ashamed to say. But I also had a really bad remote manager. This guy didn't check in. He didn't call. There was no expectations. It was complete autonomy. And coupled with that, I think there was no relationship. And that was true even when we were in the office together. There was really not any sense of building a relationship or checking in or maintaining any kind of trust and respect with me. And I think that leaked into our remote relationship. There was just nothing there, and I did not perform well, and I certainly wasn't volunteering my heart and my brain. And we're going to be talking some today about how to be way better than that as a remote manager.
This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead.
Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Folks, welcome back to another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I'm Ethan, and we also have my cohort.
Michael Nash here, dad and son.
He is my dad. He's not my son. But
Thanks for clarifying that.
I think we get the point. Hey, we're excited to be back. It's been an interesting, I would say, an interesting month plus at this point. We are in the middle.
Understatement.
Yeah, we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. We are all essentially in a shelter in place. We're all learning to adapt to working remotely. At least some of us are. Some people are just not able to work remotely. They're on the front lines of this and are still going into work. And, we sure are appreciative of them.
Yeah.
But the way I'm looking at this is we are kind of in this massive global work from home experiment where we are all learning to adapt to working in an environment where we're not physically with our colleagues. How's that going for you so far? I guess it's kind of, you do that a lot in a lot of ways already.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid for me. I spend a fair amount of time working with the team remotely anyways, but now we're having to learn how to work with all of our clients also remotely. So yeah, it's been an interesting challenge. It's been, I think it's been successful, but it's been interesting. And it's led to this series. We're going to be spending some time on this podcast talking about how to manage remotely. Our basic 5-day workshop is called Managing with Mind and Heart. And we are adding a really relevant, important, timely piece right now that's going to be valuable for years to come, which is managing remotely with Mind and Heart. So we're going to spend some time on this podcast talking about some of the tricks of the trade and some of the tools and some of the strategies for managing employees long distance.
That's exactly right. Although it is relevant right here and right now to start learning and acquiring new skills and tools for both managing remotely and working remotely. In a lot of ways, the economy is shifting more and more to having remote work teams, at least in a lot of different sectors. And so we hope that this series will provide information well beyond the point that we're all self-quarantining. Am I saying that word right?
I think so.
Self-quarantined. Yeah, it just doesn't flow off the tongue.
Quarantined,
well.
Yeah. Well, and I guess let me throw in there too. I actually think that as managers, we don't have to just settle for being, barely making it as a good manager. When we're doing remote managing, I actually think we can excel. I think we can be excellent managers and still meet the needs of our employees in a remote setting. So let's not just settle for, hey, let's try to maybe get by. Let's make it a goal for ourselves as leaders to manage with mind and heart as excellent as we possibly can.
Yeah, I really like that. Although just making it has kind of been my MO in life. So don't. Anyhow, folks, let's do something a little bit unique. We have a very special guest on this episode. And it's been a little weird up to this point because we've just been rambling on and she's just been staying quiet in the background. But Anna Gibson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. So Anna, she is a colleague of ours, and we are really blessed to have her on our team. Anna, I just want you to, if you can, just share a little bit about yourself. Share a little bit about your background, you know, where you hailed from.
For sure, I'd be happy to. So thanks, Ethan. My name is Dr. Anna Gibson, and I'm an organization development consultant with Nash Consulting, and I'm also a clinical psychologist. My background is in clinical psychology, and I got my doctorate through the University of Denver's Graduate School of Professional Psychology. And as I was getting trained, I worked in a whole bunch of different kinds of settings, both before grad school and after, doing mostly therapy and assessment work. But ultimately, I ended up specializing in organization development for kind of a number of reasons. But I completed my training at the National Center for Organization Development at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And it's been a long and winding road to get to where I am today. But ultimately, what kind of started me off on this path was that I worked for a small audiobook recording studio, actually, before I went back to grad school. I worked there for a number of years. And it was a really cool place to work. But what I found was that as the leaders there were more absent from their staff, that morale really went down across the organization. And I was really kind of observing a very direct connection between leadership and morale, employee engagement. The folks who I worked with were just incredible people, really, really bright. But the leadership was really kind of killing the feel of the place. So that really prompted my interest in helping organizations just be better, happier, healthier places. And I took kind of a roundabout route to get back to organization development. I ended up doing a clinical program, but that's kind of how I got into this work. And yeah, that's my story. And in a previous life, I was a professional actor too. So I've just taken kind of a whole winding route here, and I'm trying to figure out how this all fits together.
Wow. Okay, well, hold on to that actress note there for a moment, because I definitely want to come back to that. I can't just let that pass by. But how did you end up finding your way to Nash Consulting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I found Nash when I was looking for a job at the end of my graduate training. And I just stumbled across the website and was amazed by the material that was on there. It really felt like it tapped into a really cool spirit of how to lead effectively. And I loved that it connected back to psychology. I loved that it brought in childhood components. It really felt like it hit at managing and leading from a very different perspective than I'd seen before. So I reached out to Mike, and that's kind of how that happened. But ultimately, it was the different approach of Nash work that really drew me in.
That's great. That's great to hear. Although I know that sounds like I was essentially just teeing you up to give us a nice big compliment, but hey,
hey, I'm okay with that. That was awesome.
I am not a plant.
We can all.
I am not a plant.
Yeah, we can use the morale boost, right? No.
That's right.
Okay. You said you were doing some acting, and if I recall from our previous conversation, were you down in Hollywood for a while?
For a bit, yes. I'm from Denver originally, but I've kind of moved all over the country in the last 10 plus years. But I went to college in LA, so I did some acting in college there, but then I moved back home for a bit and then back to LA for a while to do some theater there too. So I kind of have spanned a number of careers at this point in my life.
That's really great. I mean, you're a jack of all trades in a lot of ways.
I've been accused of that in the past.
Well, hey, thanks for sharing. And yeah, we're excited to have you on this show. Now, I want to just segue here a little bit. I think we would all agree that a lot of people are going through a lot right now. I want to ask you, Mike, what do you think employees need most from their managers, specifically during this crazy time, to help them get through this, to help them keep morale high, and just maybe actually help them grow through this experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of specific things, but there's three kind of big broad categories. And Anna, let me know if you have any other kind of broad things on this one. But I think number one is they need connection, and I mean, in the sense of contact. Let's make sure we're connecting every day, maybe at least every other day. Let's maybe spell out what those connections are going to be about. So that's number one: is staying connected, staying in communication with one another. I think another big broad category is structure, expectations, timetables, what are we doing when, what do I need from you, that sort of thing. And then the third category is a little bit more about the relationship. It's, support, it's encouragement, it's, hey, I'm with you, I'm in your corner, et cetera. So those are really big, broad categories. What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The only thing that I think I would add is, given the level of uncertainty and kind of fear circulating around, that it heightens the importance of a leader's ability to be really calm and reassuring.
Oh, good.
And very predictable, as predictable as possible, just to help create some stability during such an insane time where we don't know what's coming out of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. In fact, I'd add number 5 now too. How about information? Let's do that too. There's another category, like because of the uncertainty, keep me in the loop. Tell me what's going on.
Right.
Absolutely.
We talk about what's called the top 15 management skills, and I just got to say, I think in a remote situation like this, it's like you have to take those same skills that we've been talking about here in this show, and you kind of have to crank them up to 11. Like you have to really focus in on those top 15 things when you're not in a face-to-face situation with your employees. To be effective as a manager, we're not going to change tacks. We're not going to change strategies. We're going to still stay focused on those 15 things, but you have to be almost more intentional and more focused in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just as a reminder, folks, some of our first few episodes that we did were about the top 15 management skills. So I'd encourage you to go back to listen to those. So, Mike, tell us a little bit more about what we are going to do with these top 15 management skills over the course of the next few episodes or so, and what are we going to focus on today?
Well, let's take a quick second and just kind of read through them. But what we're going to do basically is we're going to take these skills, at least some of them, or maybe not all 15, but we're going to say, okay, let's talk about this specific skill, maybe a little bit of review, just a minute or two on kind of what we've already said on this. But now, how do we apply this specifically to the remote situation? That's the idea for the next several podcasts. And we're going to have some guests each time. And I think I'm excited about that. I'm glad to have you with us here on it today. Yeah, let's do this. Let's take a quick minute and just read through the 15 management skills. We did this a couple times at the very beginning of our journey together in these podcasts. And so let me just mention the first one. We'll kind of take turns going through these. The first one is show caring and respect.
Mm-hmm. And the second is advocate for your employees.
And number 3 is one of my favorites: communicate and over-communicate as much as possible.
Yep. Number 4 is be fair and equitable.
Number 5, involve others in decisions. Be collaborative.
Yeah, and number 6 is another one of my favorites. I feel like I'm getting all the extra good ones. Give autonomy and trust. I don't think you can oversell that one.
Yeah. Number 7, it speaks to me a lot. Ask for feedback.
8, deal with and fix problems.
9, be approachable.
Number 10, give recognition and thanks.
Number 11, hold people accountable.
Number 12, be available and responsive, not just enough to be available for folks.
Yeah, number 13 is the follows. It's follow through and follow up.
14, make your expectations crystal clear.
Yeah, crystal. And 15, another one of my favorites, provide resources and training for your people to get them up to speed where they want to be in their professional development.
Yeah, and I think you take these 15 things, and again, when you're in a remote situation, you have to kind of, I don't mean double down on them. You have to be maybe more intentional and more focused on those 15 things. And that's what this kind of mini series will be about, is how do you take these and crank them up to 11.
Why do you need to turn these up to 11 when we're talking about managing remote teams?
Yeah, good question. And let's both answer it on it. But for me, it has to do with, first of all, it's just for, especially if being remote is new, right? Let's start with that. And that's not the case for everybody. But if being remote is new, meaning that it's the first time you haven't been around your team or your manager, I think just the newness of it creates some anxiety. It creates a sense of, it's not consistent. There's a lot more unknown. So we're going to need more basic leadership in that sense. We're going to need more, we're going to need to know what our new expectations are. How are we going to navigate this new world? So that's going to cause us to be a little bit more dependent in a sense on having that relationship maintained. And I'll just also say, even if it's not a new situation, if I'm not, for example, I'm not at work and you're not going to be stopping by my desk a couple times a day and saying hi, or just checking in, or bringing donuts, or, giving me information as it sort of comes up because we happen to be in the same place at the same time. It means I just basically have to take all those things and be way more intentional as a leader. I have to think to myself, look, this new information came in, or I haven't really checked in for the last day or so. I need to make sure that I intentionally do this, because it's not going to happen by itself like it might happen if we were in the same room at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think just adding a number of barriers to connecting with one another in the workplace. I mean, just not having the opportunity to pass by somebody in the break room and say, hey, how's it going on that project? You really do have to be more thoughtful and intentional about who do you need to connect with, when do you need to connect with them, who haven't I checked in with for a while, and what expectations do I really need to make clear for my folks. So managing the barriers is a completely, I think, not different, but needs to be amped up skill set.
Really good point. Really good point. And, it's totally possible to be able to manage completely distributed teams, completely remote teams, and be able to provide your employees what they need and be able to practice these top 15 management skills at a very high level. I mean, I think of workplaces like Automatic, who has about 1,000 people, and it's a completely distributed workforce. Basecamp is another one with around 50 people, and most of them are distributed. And those are organizations that are thriving. So this can be done. And for better or worse, many of us are in a situation where we get to try to practice and develop this skill that we may have not otherwise developed.
Before you move on, I just wanted to add to that. What the research is showing is that some remote teams and distributed workforces are actually working much more productively than other teams. That what we're finding is that when people have the option to work from home and they've got more flexible work scheduling, that productivity actually goes up because there's more a feeling of freedom to be able to engage in your work when you can. You're less distracted by things if if you've got your kids maybe in another room. But what really we're finding is that the productivity actually goes up, which I think is surprising, but a wonderful thing.
That's really cool to hear. I think that gives me so much hope that this remote situation we're talking about right now is not, necessarily second best, and we just have to kind of make it work. It actually, we can thrive. We can thrive as a work group, as a team, productivity wise, everything. That's great.
Totally.
Yeah, it's really cool for organizations that may have been hesitant to distribute their workforce or parts of their workforce. Hey, for better or worse, we're now in a situation where that's just going to be experimented with. So I think that said, let me bring this back around. The top 15 management skills. Today, we're going to focus in on the first one, which is show caring and respect. And again, we're looking at this through a lens of having a remote work team or a distributed work team, however you like to say it. How do we go about making sure that our employees feel that they're being cared about and feel that they're being respected by their manager? And I guess before I get there, why is it important that a manager has this skill on their radar in general, right? Not necessarily related to managing remotely, but why is it important that they show caring and respect?
This is great. This is actually what I did my dissertation on. And what I found well, I did the dissertation on leading and managing as if you were a therapist. So I took the clinical lens and I applied it to leadership. And what I found is that there's actually a ton of support that being attuned to your individual employees' unique needs and really developing a good relationship with them based on what they as a person need in a relationship helps keep them engaged. And ultimately, those folks who feel more engaged in their work show stronger loyalty to the organization. You have better retention, you've got better commitment. When a leader and an employee's relationship are really strong and the employee feels like the leader really gets them, that is nothing but good for the organization.
I think I'm gonna jump in here. I think psychologically there's this huge need we have as humans to be on someone else's radar and to be cared about, and that is so true when there's a power differential. And we've talked about that on this show before. Whether it's because of just sort of our DNA, or whether it's learned, whether it's just transference, whatever it happens to be. When we're in a situation where we have someone who has a power differential over us, it's so important to us that we know that person has our back. Because if we don't think that, if we actually suspect that this person who has power over me isn't on my side, doesn't care, that's actually frightening, right? That actually puts us in a situation where we're afraid, and then our amygdala gets involved, and our sympathetic nervous system gets involved, and we're sort of in self-defense mode. And as you said, Anna, it's so hard at that point for us to be to give our best selves, right? It's so hard for us to be productive and to really invest our mind and our heart in our work when we don't feel safe, basically. And so as a manager, we have to be able to show our people that we care about them. And I got to tell you guys, I've never forgotten the time when I was teaching the top 15 management skills. And one of the guys came up to me after class and he said, "Hey, I was really encouraged by these 15 management skills. I have all of them. I just don't have the first one," which is caring and respect. And I just had to say, "Dude, I'm sorry. It's not going to work. You can't not have that one."
Yeah,
Right.
and I'd say that one, even in this current climate, is way more important. If you're tying it back to safety in that way that you're talking about, Mike, keeping your employees feeling like there is some stability and safety in their work, that's going to be huge for them.
Yeah, the way I've heard this be explained before is through an evolutionary lens. And Mike, you touched on this, but think about it. We're in our tribes, on the Serengeti, and all of a sudden the person who is in charge of this tribe or has power over us, we feel like they don't care about us and they don't respect us. We have to worry about if we're going to get kicked out of the tribe, if we're going to survive. It kind of goes back to evolution of why this is important and why people need this.
I love that you brought
Absolutely.
evolution into it, Ethan. That's, yeah, so right on.
Yeah.
Once you get into it, people realize pretty quickly that this is really probably the most important and basic management skill there is.
Yeah. So that being said, what makes showing caring and respect, and what makes practicing this skill a little bit more challenging in a remote working environment? And obviously I'm saying that assuming that it is more challenging in a remote working environment. Let me know if you think differently.
Yeah, Anna, not to steal your thunder, but you mentioned the word barriers. And I think there's a really good word for this. There's more barriers now, right? There's distance. There's, the visual. I don't see the person. I don't have the quote open door policy opportunity in the same way. There's something a little different about calling my boss maybe than, seeing the fact that her office door is open and maybe it's a good time to, walk in and ask a question. There's a barrier, right? I have to work past time and distance and phone calls and Skype or Zoom calls or whatever. I just think everything is harder and not as spontaneous, not as in the moment. And so as a manager, I think it's just harder. You're not going to be doing this, the MBWA, which is management by walking around. You're not going to be stopping by the break room. You're not going to be able to say, "Oh, hey, good job," and just walk off, right? In real life, I could say, "Hey, good job on that project," and then just walk away, and it would feel good for that employee. Well, now I have to actually say to myself, oh, do I send an email to say good job? Do I make a phone call? Everything just has more steps. Does that make sense, Anna?
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to add a simplistic example to this, I mean, we're missing out on so much important data in engaging with people. We're missing nonverbals and literally like eye contact. When you're looking on a computer screen, you're not looking into people's eyes. And that's such an important nonverbal sign of communication. And you're missing everything, presumably, from, the chest down when you're on a video too. So just missing all of that data is just an additional barrier that makes it that much harder to connect and really demonstrate that you're with people and engaged with them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that the short conversations that are a little bit more by the way, they generally don't happen.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, let's have a conversation feels a little more formal, right? So everything's just loaded with different kinds of kind of a different vibe. And so I think it's really important that we're intentional about showing caring and respect during this time. Whereas in the workplace, you can say to yourself, when you're live, when you're in the same office with everyone, you can just know that you're a caring boss, and that's going to sort of leak out, as you're interacting with people. Whereas now you actually have to say to yourself, look, I have to find opportunities to actually provide this particular thing to my employees.
Anna, you've worked in a variety of different types of fields and workplaces, and imagine for different types of managers of all different stripes. What are examples you've seen of a manager showing both caring and respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to talk about that. I've got a few examples here. Mike is actually one of my examples.
But we're going to roast him? No, just kidding.
Oh my gosh. Am I going to be on the good list or the bad list on this?
Well, I don't know.
Can we cut this piece?
But the first example I wanted to share was when I was working at the VA, we traveled around to all medical facilities across the nation, basically. And I worked with one medical center director with my team at one of the top facilities. And what we saw her doing there was something really incredible. She had handpicked her people based on how well she thought that they would balance out the team kind of personality and culture. And to be able to do that, she really had to get to know the folks that she was onboarding. So she did, when we were working with her and her team, she really did a beautiful job of balancing focus on the work, but also focus on the humans that were in the room there with her. And by the time that we were done working with them, I felt like I knew these people. I felt like they were close personal friends. We just did this incredible work. And that was really driven by her as a leader and that intentionality in engaging with her team. I've also had some really, really great supervisors in my life. I had a supervisor in grad school who ended up being the officiant at my wedding last October. And what was really wonderful about that was that he held both my husband and I to really, really high standards that pushed us to become better psychologists. And he really coached us through our work, through the years that we worked together, and all the way into our professional careers. And now he's become a really loved mentor in our lives. I mean, to the point that he was, that he led our wedding.
Wow.
So if that's not caring and respect, I'm not sure what is. He navigated that beautifully.
Yeah. I love that last example you gave, because I heard two different things there. You said, for one, he pushed you to a very high standard, right? And to me, that's actually a way of showing respect, right? I respect you enough that I want to push you to be the best you can be.
Yeah, and I believe in you enough. I know that there is this potential in you that isn't quite tapped yet, and I know what will help kind of push you there, and not demandingly so. It was never aggressive or inappropriate. It was just like, I know that there's something in you, and let me help develop the edges to get you there.
Yeah, and then the other thing you said there is that he coached you through that, which to me that's the caring part of that.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you? You've had your fair share of working with managers. What is something you've seen, a way that they've shown caring and respect?
Oh, there's so many things. I think it's things like showing concern for their work-life balance. right? As opposed to, you're here to serve me, or I want to get as much out of you as I can, showing concern and interest in their personal and professional development. Boy, when a manager wants an employee to grow professionally, and that might even mean that employee stops working for that manager and that manager loses a good employee, but the manager is still focused on that employee getting what they need, not what the manager needs. I think that's a really good example of it. It's listening in a way where the employee really doesn't feel like the manager is just checking a box, but they've actually, they're doing all those listening skills that we've talked about on the show. They're stopping what they're doing. They're doing really good eye contact. They're really asking great questions. That manager or that employee feels listened to, so therefore they feel cared about. It's advocating for them. It's getting the equipment that they need and getting the training that they need. I mean, there's so many aspects to showing. And the bottom line is you're showing that employee that they are on your radar and you are in their corner. That is so much more, that's so much broader and deeper than just anything that looks like you're sort of checking a box and making sure that you're doing your management skill. It comes from a place in your heart, but it also comes from a knowledge that if these employees do not feel cared about, they're not going to be able to give us their best self.
Mike, I love that distinction between developing a skill being different from kind of the vision and the intention of the deeper leadership quality. I think that's a really important thing that a lot of managers sometimes miss if they are approaching it from the checking the box standpoint. But if it's really something that you're kind of living intentionally, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you're doing it that way, Anna, I think what can happen is it's not really dependent on the kind of relationship you have with that employee, right? I mean, this might be an employee that you've grown close with and you're actually also friends, and it might not be. This might be an employee that you never see outside the workplace and you don't really have a whole lot of conversations about personal stuff at all. I don't think it matters. I still think that we're able as leaders to show caring and respect no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, these are, I mean, you both gave great examples of ways that managers have shown caring and respect in general, but also everything I heard you can still do those things remote. Nothing you said is specific to having to be there in person with your employee.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so let's kind of change gears. Like what it is more challenging, right, to do those things because again, the barriers that we've talked about. So let's get really practical here and talk about, how do we still find those opportunities to demonstrate caring and respect. What we don't want to do, and this is a little bit complicated and maybe hard to explain, but when it's time to go remote, let's say we've been in the same office, but now we're going remote. I would hope that there's some bank account already, right? I would hope that I've been already showing caring and respect so that there is some bank account, right? Like we can rely on the fact that employee already knows that I have their back. And so let's start from that perspective. And then you move into a remote situation, right? What do we do now to maintain that it's obvious that we have the employees back, that we care, et cetera, et cetera. And Anna, why don't you start with that? What are some things that we can do as leaders, as managers to continue showing caring and respect to our employees?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about some of the barriers here, but some of them still apply, like having an open door policy for your folks where they can reach out to you when they need something. And hopefully you're also scheduling regular one-on-ones, and we can talk more about that too. But being available and accessible as a manager still in a remote environment it's doable. And I want to add a little bit of a cautionary comment to that, being that what we know about remote work settings is that about a quarter of people tend to have some trouble unplugging from work. So work can kind of start to bleed into this 24/7 thing. So for you as a manager, making sure that you're even though you have this open door policy, right, and you're probably working much harder now than you were before moving into this setting, to make sure that you are intentionally also building in time for yourself to take care of yourself. We know that working 24/7 has all kinds of effects on emotional and physical well-being. So kind of finding a balance between the open door policy, but with some boundaries around that and making that explicit.
I love that, Anna. That you've just got to kind of two bookends or two kind of ends of the spectrum here, and it's
Cool.
really good. And let's go back to the first part. Open door policy. When you're remote, you really have to give permission. Like, you have to make sure that people understand that you don't have to think twice before you give me a call, right? Before you text me, and decide maybe together what's going to be the best communication method. Shoot me an email anytime, give me a call, send me a text, whatever it is. Make that agreement with your people, but take away the barrier as much as you can, because people are going to have some, depending on the personality, right? Depending on the behavior style, they're going to have some shyness about, oh, I've already talked to you 3 times today. I'm taking up too much of your time. Well, no, because in the office, you probably would have talked to me 10 times. It's totally, yep. So let's start with that, right? It's totally okay. And I would encourage managers to have this conversation. Don't assume that your people know that you are totally okay with any kind of reaching out. And of course, you'll have the basic obvious stuff. Hey, if I can't be, if you can't reach me right now, I will get back to you as soon as I can. There's no harm, no foul in sending me a note, leaving me a voicemail, whatever it takes. Please reach out. And then the other end of the spectrum, which I'm so glad you said that. And now, when is the time that I'm not available? And it's okay to not be available. And that can even be a chunk of time during the day. Right? Hey, for this hour, I'm not going to be reachable. Hey, I'll be back at 2. Or, hey, I'm going to check out tonight. I'm going to go offline at 5:30. If it's an emergency, here's the way to reach me. But otherwise, let's check in tomorrow. I love that.
Yeah. I've been that manager who fails to set some parameters around my availability, right? So it's a balance.
Yeah, and I think there's a role modeling component in there too, Ethan, that if you're demonstrating good work-life boundaries, that your folks are gonna be able to do that a lot better too. Sorry,
Absolutely.
Mike, I saw you were jumping in there.
No, Anna, what you just said, in fact, I want to go where you're going first. I've actually talked to employees who've said this. They're getting emails from their manager at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, because the manager's taking care of things. Well, that tells the employee, oh, I guess I should be doing this too. I guess I'm not supposed to take a break. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're actually doing your employees a favor by modeling the boundaries. So going back to the open door policy and what Ethan said, right? It is about being available, but what we're doing now is we're replacing what happens in the workplace with how that will look remotely. So specifically, what we're replacing open door policy with is, it's always okay, other than the times I'm not available, but other than that, please reach out. Don't be shy. You're giving permission. And then we also have to replace sort of the MBW management by walking around, MBWA, right? How do we replace that, right? Because I'm not going to be able to just walk by somebody's cubicle or check in, in real time. So how do I do that without being a lurker or a creepy pest, right? I mean, am I going to be calling that employee every hour? Hey, how you doing now? How you doing now? Right? That's not okay. So how do we replace that sort of regular sort of check-in? I'm not to the one-on-ones yet. It's sort of that more daily kind of thing. And I've got a couple thoughts, but Anna, let me ask you first. How do you kind of replace that contact when it's not the employee reaching out to you, but it's you checking with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of what I've seen in readings and in the research so far is that they've got kind of 3 communication guidelines for managers, that you should have some way of being able to do asynchronous communication, which often will involve just more written communication, especially if you're working across global timelines. So maybe it's just shooting an email, maybe it's sending a text message, but then also if you've got a way to send chats to your employees and you've got some kind of just easy check-in system, that's a great way to do it. Just say, hey, I'm wondering how you're doing today. How are things going over there? Do you need anything from me to get going today? Something as simple as that. So asynchronous communication, and then blogs, centralized blogs can be a great place to do that. And then also that chat function. So that's what I would add.
And I love the fact that there's all those different tools and you're intentionally, so this is the thing, it's not out of sight, out of mind, right? As a manager, you've got to think about, and it's going to be different for each employee. It's probably going to be different for each function, but how frequent should that be? And I don't think there's a way we can answer that today, but in general, again, you kind of crank this up a little bit and say to yourself, well, because I'm not walking past their cubicle and, we're not just stopping by each other's offices, I need to have some of those moments throughout the day where I do exactly what you just described. Send a text or an email. Hey, are you doing okay? Anything you need? You can even say, hey, I'm going to give you a call in the next hour or so just to check in and see where we're at on the XYZ project. I just think it's really important you do that and then not overdo it, right? You don't, again, want to be a pest. You don't want to look like you're now starting to micromanage. It's a balancing
I think
act.
one way to not show up as a pest is just to say something like, no need to respond immediately whenever you've got a second, just wanted to check in on this, so that people don't feel this pressure to provide an immediate response like, oh, my boss is calling me, I better answer this right now, I got to drop everything that I'm doing. That shouldn't be the chat function, but when it works and after you've set the expectations.
That's really good. I think you're talking about the power differential, right? My boss just texted me, oh no, I have to respond. I love that. Giving them permission not to respond right now. Or even not to respond at all if they don't need to, depending on the message, right?
Yeah. For a lot of people, including myself, it can also be helpful to kind of set up systems for yourself. Meaning that maybe if you have a remote work team and you have multiple employees, it's like, hey, maybe at 10 o'clock, a time that works best, we just that's the time we know we're going to check in with each other kind of before the day gets started and see if anything's going on. And then maybe we'll do a little check-in at the end of the day. I mean, that doesn't replace kind of the, just check-ins throughout the day to show care and respect. But if you can set up a system, especially when you're remote, it's obviously going to be a lot less likely that you're going to forget about Mike over here that I actually haven't called for 3 days because I have all these other projects going on and all these other employees.
Yeah, that's really good, Ethan, because here's the thing. I would encourage managers to do what Ethan just said, but figure that out with the employee. Like talk to the employee and make this plan together, as opposed to you saying, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to check in with you this time and this time. Have a conversation with each employee and say, look, we're in this new situation. So how are we going to do this? Now you may arrive at, and I love the one you just mentioned, Ethan, you may arrive at, hey, let's do a morning check-in at, let's say 9 or 10. Let's do a 10-minute check-in and let's wrap up the day together, right? Let's take a couple minutes or 5 minutes or half an hour, whatever it takes, and kind of review where we're at and check in on the project or whatever. So you may arrive at kind of a twice a day sort of a cadence. You may arrive at a once a day cadence, depending on the job. You may even go less frequently than that or even more frequently. But I love the idea of you and the employee putting your heads together and you being really open to what that employee thinks and what they need, and then together making that plan.
Love that.
We have danced around the topic of one-on-one meetings. Mike, let's start with you. What would be your suggestion of having or how to have these one-on-ones in a remote setting? Meaning, do you think they're more important now in a remote setting? Like, should you be having them more often?
I think that your question kind of leads me to this thought, which is that people get a little confused sometimes by the phrase, by the word one-on-one. So let's define our terms, because if you haven't listened to that episode, this might be pretty confusing. Obviously, every conversation we've been talking about so far today is one-on-ones, right? It's one person talking to one person. So just to be really clear, we're talking right now about a real different kind of a conversation that managers really should be having with their employees on a regular basis. And sometimes this is monthly. That's kind of what we advise. There will be some differences in that depending on how many employees you're managing. But we've talked on this show, and we do a lot of training on this in our classes. It's so important that managers have this time, and we're going to kind of use monthly right now as a gauge, this time where you're really digging into sort of some different areas. It's not just tasks. It's not just, let's talk about the project you're on. These aren't the daily check-ins. Those things just need to happen anyways. It's not your open door policy. This is you and that person intentionally sitting down for a scheduled meeting once a month, spending an hour together, whatever, 45 minutes, and really talking about some deeper things. This might be things like the employee development plan. This might be maybe digging into where are they on the challenge competency continuum. How are they feeling about their stress level? What are some ideas they have for solving some specific problems around the office? It's deeper, it's broader. It's the kind of conversations that aren't going to come up in a open door policy. It would be really awkward, for example, if you came in and used my open door policy and say, hey, Mike, could you help me with this? And I helped you. And then I said to you, oh, by the way, what would you like to see more of or less of from me as a manager? right? That's going to be a really weird conversation right there because no one's prepared for it and it seems out of context. And so what we're talking about here is one-on-ones, regular monthly, deeper conversations. And then what do we do about that remotely? And to answer your question, Ethan, I don't see a big difference in frequency at this point. I don't think we have to change our pattern or change our cadence. We're already going to be doing maybe more of those other kind of check-ins that we've just got through talking about. Those are going to happen as frequently as they need to happen. So we're still going to want to have this, let's say, monthly conversation where you set everything else aside and you just get deeper.
And one thing I would add to that is that during this time, while a huge number of organizations are for the very first time getting up and running, doing remote work, there may be more frequent one-on-ones up front, but that it's important to be intentional about cutting back on those as you sort of get into a steady rhythm, but being very clear about that up front with your people that, just for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be meeting every day for 15 minutes just to check in. And then from, 6 weeks out, we're going to meet once a week. Or, that's an absurdly frequent frequency. You may not have to do it that much, but being very clear about the transition plan too out of that.
Yeah. I like what you're both saying there, Mike. You're touching on the fact that, just because we're working remote, doesn't mean we have all this extra time on our hands, right? We still have a job, we still have things to do. So, having your, not needing to necessarily increase your one-on-ones in the long run makes sense. It's just, making the most of that time. But Anna, what you're saying makes complete sense too. During a time when you're maybe transitioning into remote work, there may be a more need to check in and have those intentional more in-depth meetings with people as they're going through change, as they're dealing with things that are unforeseen, as they're dealing with uncertainty. So that makes sense to me as well. And then transitioning into a regular schedule once people kind of settle into the new environment.
Yeah, and I do want to just put a word of caution about frequency. I want us to be careful that we don't try to do these too often. And I think it starts to blur the line between what we're talking about. I am not talking about check-ins. I think that I'm with you, Anna. When it comes to, you mentioned the 15-minute check-in weekly or daily or whatever, I think that's a very different thing. And those need to happen, you're right, I think more frequently up front. But I certainly am not going to want my manager to call me every other day and dig into some really deep, hey, how are you and I doing? And,
well, no, of course not. Not every other day.
So I would probably lean toward keeping these one-on-ones not too frequent because it's going to start to wear out that employee. Hey, can you give me some feedback as as a manager, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the thing is though, and this is where they all kind of run together, part of caring and respect, isn't it asking a question during a check-in like, hey, how's your stress level, right? Or, hey, this transition has been, challenging. So how you doing with your work-life balance? And I think, Anna, that's what you're talking about, right? Is let's continue to ask those questions anyways to show caring and respect.
Yeah, it's an important point. And I think the spectrum that you're talking about is super relevant here. Anything from an impromptu check-in all the way to those monthly or weekly one-on-ones, whatever they might look like. And then in between this time of transition for your organization, if you are just getting up and running, that there might be a little bit of fluidity in there, but as soon as you can get back to a predictable, regular one-on-one schedule with your folks, the better.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And this one-on-one time is just as important, if not more. I don't know if it's more important. That's probably not true. But actually, let me say it this way. I think it's easy to not do these. I think if you're transitioning to a remote situation, you're doing more check-ins anyways. So it might be easy for this to fall off the radar, that we still want to have that monthly or whatever it is, that time where you're going to dig in a little deeper. It might be the time where you even send them the question ahead of time and say, hey, here's a couple things I want to talk to you about in our one-on-one. What do you have some things that you're going to want to talk about? And you don't have to do that, but kind of preloading things sometimes, but I would just say, let's protect this time so that there still is that chance to kind of get together and have a virtual cup of coffee together and, put work aside is the idea a little bit and dig a little deeper. Yeah, so let's maybe talk right now about during this time of remote managing, and we're going to be doing these one-on-ones. What might be some of those questions we want to ask during the one-on-ones, what might be some of the topics we want to bring up. Now we've, go back to previous episodes. We listed dozens of great topics and questions in general, and those still apply, I think, in most cases. But what might we want to be focused on during this time specifically? And Anna, why don't you start?
So
with that?
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I actually have a personal example here. When I was transitioning into work for my last job, it was the first time that I was working virtually with clients and also coworkers. And I was completely stymied by the delay in technology. I was used to working with people one-on-one, face-to-face, being able to get all of that good body language stuff, and just missing out on so much of that data. I really had to take some time and to work with my supervisor on how do you make this feel a little bit more free-flowing? How do I make this work better? So maybe one of the questions that you ask is, how are you adapting to a virtual setting here? Are you noticing, how are you noticing it changing the way that you work? What's coming up for you around that piece in particular?
I love that. Yeah, anything around the challenges of remote working. What's working, what's not working, what are the roadblocks? What can I do to help you with those? What can we do together to maybe work on those, to fix those, to improve those? I love that.
Exactly.
I would add another one, which is, hey, when you're working from home, it's so much easier to have everything in your life blur together, right? The lines are not very clear, right? You're not leaving in the morning and then coming home in the evening. Everything is happening there together, and you're seeing your partner or your kids or your roommates, or you might run out and do an errand. I get that, and so. Yeah, maybe asking questions about how is that new balance going? How are you balancing work and life? And, as they're running together, how are you doing in keeping yourself sane through that messiness? And is there some way that I can help you with that?
Yeah, Mike, I love that. I think that's also one way of demonstrating caring and respect, that you're not blurring the line by getting into people's personal lives too deeply, but you're making sure that they're balancing that in the way that will work best for them, and helping them do it in whatever way will work for them.
Yeah, I'll give you another one, and then on back to you. But how about talk about communication? Information is what I'm talking about now. How is information flowing? Is it flowing well? Are there other things that I'm not keeping you informed on that you wish I was? Are we talking together as frequently as we need to be? What do you want to know? What can I go find out for you? Just trying to meet that need that employees have to be informed might be a really good topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe also something about how things are going with teamwork too, especially if you're working actually on a remote team. How is the team engaging together in this new setting? Is there anything that you need from me to help make teamwork more effective during this time?
Ooh, I love that. I hadn't thought of that one. That could even include, should we meet together more frequently as a team? And that's a great question and a topic. How can we not lose the sense of team that we've developed over the years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a couple other quick ones. I think a question about how the employee is doing in terms of productivity, and how are they feeling about that, right? And do we need to make some adjustments to our expectations? What we were expecting to have accomplished when we were together in the office space might change. So let's revisit, right? Let's revisit, what are the timelines? What are the by whens? What are the expectations? I think that would be something to talk about. And then another one would be the whole issue of autonomy, right? And, I don't, now that we're not together in the same place, let's talk about how much help I'm going to be offering you, how much guidance, what do you need in terms of autonomy? And this isn't any different than maybe a conversation you would have at the office anyways, but I think the landscape kind of shifts when you're doing remote work. And so maybe talking a little bit together about how we're going to manage this particular project. How often do we need to be talking about this? Where am I going to jump in and help versus where are you just going to take it on your own and then come back and we'll debrief and review together, that sort of thing.
Mike, I love that you brought up autonomy there. And I think making an explicit statement about trust in there could probably go a really long way. I mean, you're extending a huge amount of trust to your employees by letting them work from home, really, and saying, I really believe that you are going to be able to be successful in this situation. And I trust that you're doing what you need to get things done.
Oh, that's actually brilliant. I totally agree. Having an actual specific conversation about trust and letting them know you trust them, asking what they need, yeah, even explicitly saying, look, I don't want to be too distant, but I also don't want to micromanage you. Let's talk about the dance, right? How are we going to make this work in the context of me? I really do trust you. I
Love
love
that.
that, Anna. That's great.
That's all really good stuff. I would also just add that the tools and resources you need when working remotely could be very different than the tools and resources you need working in an office.
That's good.
And those tools and resources might not even be known yet by both your employee and yourself. And so having that dialogue in your one-on-ones and just whenever you can connect on that will help clarify, okay, now that we're in a different environment, what tools do we need here? What tools are going to be helpful? And how can I help provide those for you? So I think keeping an eye on that can be very helpful. So that can be an evolving conversation. Thanks for all that. Thanks you both for providing us some questions. Hopefully those can get our managers and our leaders out there that are listening to the show, get them started on having some productive one-on-ones with their remote teams. Mike, I know that you and as well as Anna and some others on this team have been putting together a new class. And it's a new class that is targeting remote working teams. Our 5-day cornerstone course is called Managing with Mind and Heart. So we have a new class that's called Managing Remotely with Mind and Heart. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's basically, specifically, it's kind of what we're talking about here is how do you take the best practice management skills and then gear them toward the remote setting. So we're going to be talking about, we'll be visiting one-on-ones. We'll be talking about meetings. We'll be talking about autonomy. We'll be talking about communication. We'll be talking about decision-making and being collaborative. We're going to basically take all those things that are easier to do in the office or in the live setting, and we're going to say, let's apply this to the remote world. So we want to see our managers not just be excellent managers. We want to see our managers be excellent managers remotely. And so that's going to be the point of this workshop. It is a virtual workshop at this time, which is, really appropriate. It's a 2.5-hour workshop, and we would really encourage you listeners, if you're interested in your managers getting together and, no, I'm sorry, take that back. In the day and age today, we're not getting together, but we're remotely doing training. And we would love to offer this 2.5-hour training to all the managers out there. So send us a note, send an email, get a hold of us because we'd love to give you this opportunity.
Hey, well, you got me hooked. That sounds exciting, but I guess I'm
great.
biased. Hey, any last words on anything that you would like to leave with our listeners as they're thinking about managing their remote teams here and looking at the skill of showing caring and respect? What do you got?
Yeah, I'll throw my clinical psych hat into the ring here. I think one of the keys to navigating this time, and especially this coronavirus time, well, and I know we're talking about managing remotely more generally, but in particular in this time, keep in mind that your folks are probably pretty scared. And what that means is that all of their sympathetic nervous system activation is going on haywire. So your primary role, one of your primary roles as a manager is to help keep people calm and help get people to a place where they can really focus on work so that they're not distracted by all of the things that they're afraid of right now.
Thanks for that. Mike, how about you? Any closing words for our dear audience out there?
I would just say if we are talking about a transition from being in the office together to remote, I would just say stop and have conversations about this with your people in a group, on Zoom or Skype or whatever, one-on-one, but be intentional, have conversations, make some plans, as opposed to just moving into the remote setting and expecting everyone just to roll with it and adjust.
That's really great. Yeah, well, hey, I'm just going to kind of echo something I said earlier, but I do think that this situation we're in, for better or worse, is offering, really a unique opportunity for many companies to finally build a culture that allows some long overdue work flexibility. It'll be interesting to see what the result of this will be. So that's what I want to leave you all with. Besides that, hey, I just would recommend that you all sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can either just go to our website and sign up there, or you can text the word leading, as in leading, to 66866. And again, it's just once a month, and essentially just management tips and strategies that will hopefully provide you useful information for managing teams and managing yourself. All right, folks. Anna, Mike, say bye. Goodbye.
Hey, thanks for being here with us, listeners.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And until next time, goodbye.